Hello, everybody. Welcome and good morning. I think we're about ready to get started here. So we are so glad to see so many of y'all here with us today for our webinar on Train the Trainer, Strength-Based Practices. So I'm going to be one of your hosts today. My name is Reina Barrera Aguilar, and I'm a fellow here at 10,000 Degrees. I advise the students at Sonoma State University and Sacramento State University. And I've been a fellow now for 2 years. And I'm also an alumna of the program. So I've been involved with 10,000 Degrees for over 10 years, I think now going on 11 years since I was 15 years old.
Cool. Thank you, Reina. Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you all for being here bright and early. My name is Scott. I'm a program director at 10,000 Degrees. This is my 11th year at 10,000 Degrees in this role. I'm not an alum, but it's been my real pleasure to have worked with many of our students for over a decade and watch them grow and graduate and do amazing things in the world, like Reina, like my colleague Maria, who's also on this call, who will introduce herself in a minute. I actually see some alums in the audience.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Hernandez. I am the Virtual and Curriculum and Engagement Manager here at 10,000 Degrees. I have been working with 10,000 Degrees for about 2 years now. I was a degree student myself, got connected with 10,000 Degrees in around 2013.
Thank you again for being here. Just very quickly before we kind of start this morning, a little bit about 10,000 Degrees for those of you who are not as familiar with our work. We are a college success organization serving 7 Bay Area counties. And the students and families who we serve come from low income backgrounds. Almost all are folks of color, and almost all are the first to attend and then eventually graduate from college here in the United States. And I think most importantly is the need for this work. Like, why do we do this? Because despite some real advancements over the years in terms of policy and access, it's still really hard, right? For students of color, for students from low income backgrounds, for first-gen students who don't have family members who've gone to college to actually make it, right? It's still really challenging. So that's why we exist. And that's what we're really all about. And so how do we actually help support those students in a variety of ways? We start as early as middle school in some cases. We serve high school students and families, college students. It's scholarships, it's career advising. It's having one go-to person that you can always count on to help you navigate all these complicated systems and the challenges along the way. It's academic support. It's helping you with grad school when you get closer to the end or whatever your next career step might be. And it's really our pleasure. It's so much fun. This is work that is really endlessly challenging in the best possible way. And it's still great. 11 years into this stuff still gets me really excited. And it's work that we all really love and do from the heart.
Okay, great. So now I just want to review some of the goals that we have for today. So I want you to learn and use strength-based language. We want you to walk away feeling like you have some new tools in your toolkit that you can bring back to your schools, to your org, your colleagues, and use with your students. And of course, we want you to have fun today and build community with each other.
For being here. So just a couple group agreements because it is a large group. There's a lot of folks here today. We don't know each other yet, so just wanted to set a few norms because we are going to be doing a lot of breakouts, right? We promised an interactive session and we're going to try to deliver on that. So there's going to be a lot of small discussion in smaller rooms. And so a couple agreements to go over just to make sure that everybody feels really safe and welcome and included this morning. Our first one, and we do these agreements with all of our students and their groups as well, is one mic. So when y'all are in your smaller breakout rooms, I'm sure everybody has a ton of best practices and lived experience and cool stuff to share. But for the purpose of really facilitating discussion, one at a time, please. So make sure that you're really listening when it's your turn to listen, and then when it's your turn to share, one at a time. So that's what one mic means. Thank you. Related is our second group agreement, and we call it step up, step down. I've heard this called lots of things, but the essence of this is that really try to be self-aware, and in those smaller spaces, if you are really dominating the conversation, if you are always starting, if you're always leading, if you're always taking up a lot of space, that's great. We love that you're sharing. We love that you have a lot to contribute, and maybe be aware of that. and maybe step down just a little bit to give other people the opportunity if you notice that you're sharing a lot. Conversely, if you notice that you're not speaking very much and that you're mostly just listening and not contributing a whole lot in those spaces, try to be self-aware of that and challenge yourself to step up a little bit. Your voice matters. Your lived experience matters, whether you've been doing this for 1 year or 25 years. And we really think that the discussion is going to be rich if all folks are really listening and contributing roughly evenly. So that's step up, step down. And then finally, because a lot of us don't know each other, right? There's a lot of folks who are meeting and going to be speaking for the first time today. Please listen, always listen, really, but in spaces like this with new folks, please listen with the intent to understand, right? I'm certain that there will be folks with different opinions, different experiences, and that's great, right? I think that difference is really rich and really is going to contribute to more robust discussion, but always go in with the intent to understand first. Great, and thank you so much. I don't know if folks have other stuff they want to put in the chat, but those are our 3 core group agreements. Thanks, y'all.
All right, so for our first breakout activity, obviously we want to get you all talking, learn more about who else is here today, and this will be a chance for you to identify goals for yourself. And here are the questions that we have for you all to answer. So say your name, your role, the organization or the school that you come from, what brought you here today, where did you go to college, and who was the best professor or teacher you ever had, what was the class and what made them so special. So we'll see y'all back here in a minute.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back, folks. Hopefully you got a chance to talk to somebody really interesting, somebody really cool, somebody that hopefully you haven't met before, and y'all got to share a little bit. We'll go ahead and get started talking about our agenda now. But anyway, in terms of what we're covering today, we're going to do a brainstorm activity to kind of set the tone. And then from there, I'd say the 2 primary core components of this are the strength-based approach. We're going to dive into what we think that means. We want to give y'all a chance to share out what that means to y'all in your own work. And then we'll practice some strength-based language and go through some specific examples that we've seen with students. And then Raina will sort of do the second half of the workshop this morning and talk about non-judgmental practice, which really goes hand in hand with sort of the strength-based approach. And then hopefully if we're doing our job and staying reasonably on time, we'll have some space at the end to do some more complicated case studies, real scenarios that we've seen with our students to try to put together all of these concepts and all of the language and things that we're talking about this morning, and then finish up with some questions and answers. Cool, thank you.
All righty, so now we're going to have that brainstorming activity, and we want you to think about what are the most important qualities that you believe students value in a professional adult? And for this, it might be helpful for you to think about the qualities that you valued in adults in your life when you were younger. You can start by saying your name, your role, your organization in your school, and what are the most important qualities students value in professional adults. So we'll send you all out into the breakout rooms again, discuss with your colleagues, and then when we come back, we'll share out a little bit with a larger group. Awesome. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So hopefully this time you got to meet some new people in your groups. And we want to know, what were some of the qualities that you identified in your groups? Please feel free to drop them in the chat. Trust, absolutely. Listening without judgment, respect, fun, honesty, authenticity. I really like that one. Representation, yep. Transparency, compassion, meet them where they're at. Keep in mind, everyone has their own ecosystem. Those are so awesome. Y'all are already on the right track. I love it. Ally, knowledgeable, competent, safe space, boundaries. Yes, yes to all of that. And we'll share some of the responses that we came up with. So empathy. I think that, all of us who feel a calling to come into this line of work and to already just be naturally super empathetic people. So, why is this important? I think that it really demonstrates our humility and sets the tone for kind of a two-way dynamic versus a top-down expert authority dynamic, which Scott will talk about a little bit more later. When we show compassion for our student, it shows that we're making an effort to understand them and what they're going through. And consistency, being reliable, especially when we work with populations who maybe are used to a lot of instability in their lives, being consistent, by showing up emotionally and physically in the ways that we say that we will, and being predictable is important. And I think that can feel really safe for a lot of students. And genuineness, students are really good at picking up on times when we're not being genuine. And objectivity, non-judgmental, this is something that I'll talk about a lot more in detail later. But I think it is really, really critical for respect and building rapport with students. And concreteness, which, for us means being clear and direct, not sugarcoating things, and believing that students are capable of critical thinking and of having challenging conversations. So thank you all so much for your participation in that. That was great.
So we're about to jump into strength-based practice, and we always like to start here with the ecosystems perspective, sometimes also called the ecological perspective or the ecological model. This comes from a lot of social science research and practice. And I think the main point for me here is that even before we start thinking about individual qualities in a student, which we'll get to, all the really great strength-based stuff, which everybody on this call already has, right? I loved all the answers y'all gave in our pre-survey about what does strength-based mean to you. Y'all got it already. Like, this is just a cool opportunity for us to maybe share some of our own ideas around this. But we think even before you get there, to zoom out just a little bit, and we always start all of our staff training with this. The ecosystems perspective. This is understanding our students in their broader contexts, right? We all have our own roles, whether we're administrators, we're counselors, we're classroom teachers, we're avid teachers, whatever it might be. And we certainly have our own roles, and you're going to get individual students in front of you, and you have a task to perform with that student, and that student will present however they're presenting that day. And that's all super important, and we're going to get into that. But we think before you even get there, start here. Really make an attempt to understand each student that you work with in the context of their larger ecosystems, right? But the point is that our students have complicated lives, and what we see in the classroom or in our offices, we're maybe 5% of what's going on. Even though our work is super important, even though that relationship is really important, right? Whether it's school, whether it's an after-school program, it's tutoring, whatever it might be. But there's a lot more, right? Our students live these complex lives, and we think really good strength-based practice sort of starts with understanding that complexity. And we actually want to invite all of you to spend a little time sharing with each other and spend a little time thinking about the students that you serve, the families you serve, and their ecosystem. So, okay. And ways to think about it, these are some, this is certainly not an exhaustive list. Who are your students? What are their individual identities, right? Their ethnicity, genders, races, immigration status. Think about their positions within their own families, right? Are they the oldest? Are they only children? Do they have a whole bunch of folks living in the same house as them, right? Think about their friends. Who are they friends with? Their social networks, their organizations. They're part of your school. They're part of your nonprofit, right? Whatever that might be. They're part of your church. That's part of community, maybe. Their neighborhoods. I think this is a big one. At least it took me a while to start thinking more seriously about where do our students and families actually live, and what's going on in those neighborhoods, right? And how does that show up for them in their schools or at their nonprofits? And then if you want to really zoom out broadly, think about what's happening right now. Is there school policy that affects your students and families? City policy? Things going on at the state level, at the national level? Just an example, I don't know about all of y'all, but the last 4 years under the previous presidential administration was really, really challenging for a lot of our students. And certainly a lot of the challenges haven't gone away, even with the change in presidential administration. So thinking about all of these things, right? All the complexities of our students' lives. And we want to invite y'all to think about this a little bit. And then in your smaller groups, who do you serve, right? And who are they? What's really going on, right, in the ecosystems for your students and your families? So we want to give y'all a couple more minutes to meet some new folks and share out. And we'll see you back here in a few. Okay, welcome back, folks. I hope you got to meet some new interesting people. I hope y'all got to share, and also you got to listen and learn about the communities, the ecosystems of a lot of the other students and families and communities. Folks, so thank you. Last piece I'll say on the ecosystems perspective is that this isn't something you do once at the very beginning when you first get a new job or a new assignment, right? This is kind of ongoing and sort of always staying attuned to what's happening in your students and in your family's ecosystem. So thanks, y'all. We really appreciate that. And now we're going to move into strength-based practice. What does that mean to you? What do you think it means to approach students from a strength-based perspective? We welcome your answers in the chat real quick so y'all can see it. Seeing the whole person. Mindset, honoring what they value, right? Focusing on positives, wonderful. Individual strengths, right? Building on wherever that student is, kind of meeting them where they're at. Yes, I love this, all of this. Those are wonderful. Those are wonderful, but yeah. Okay, so strength-based, this is a mindset, really, right? This is a way of thinking about the work. This is something that really comes from the heart too, right? This is something that y'all gotta believe from in here. And sometimes it's presented in opposition to some of these older, more deficiency models, right? And so we're really gonna argue for a strength-based perspective because it's modern, it's progressive, and it's really, really focused on the future, and it's focused on solutions, right? It's focused on solutions. And like so many of y'all said in the chat, it is also very much focused on existing strengths of the students. I think the important word for me there is existing, like the students already have it, right? And this last piece, which Raina had already sort of alluded to a little bit earlier, it also sets the foundation for a real partnership, for a two-way dynamic between you, the adult professional, and that student whom you are serving, as opposed to these sort of deficiency models. These are a little more outdated. These are kind of always looking at things in the past. They're looking at problems. It's putting a lot of sort of blame and judgment on the student themselves or on the family member themselves. And it tends to be kind of top down, with the adult sort of as the expert and sort of the student just sitting there and receiving all of this. So let's kind of get into this a little bit. So what are some of the assumptions behind a strength-based approach? And so the first one, and again, this comes from the heart. This is a mindset thing, right? That every student you meet, every single one of them, right, that you meet already has an existing reservoir of strengths and competencies. They have it. I promise they already have it, no matter how they're presenting to you in the moment, right? It's in there. They may not see it yet. It may never have been framed to that particular student as a strength before. And that's a real opportunity for us, the adult professionals in their lives, is to help those students see that, to help them build upon, like some of y'all have said already in the chat, what they already have. But you gotta have this assumption, right? Every time you meet somebody new, know that it's in them, right? It's in them, and it's our job to help them find it and help them develop it and help them see it. Okay. Second assumption for strength-based work, right, is that every student, every single one of them, right, that you've ever worked with, and all the new ones that you haven't met yet, they all of them have the capacity for growth and change. They do. Of course they do, right? No matter, again, how they're presenting when you first meet them, no matter what, right? And I think everybody knows this. This makes a lot of sense, but here, let me drive this point home really quickly with a really easy example. I want everybody here, you don't have to paste it in the chat, you don't have to share it in a breakout room, just spend 30 seconds and let's all reflect back to what we were like when we were 14 years old. What were you like when you were 14? What did you look like? What did you think about the world? What did you think you knew about yourself? Like, think about 14-year-old you, and then think about where you're at now, right? Of course you've grown. Of course you've changed, right? And every single student that you meet has that same potential too. Again, no matter where you're first encountering them, no matter how they're showing up. And so again, I really think of the strength-based perspective as a real opportunity for us as the professional adults in these students' lives, right? To see that, help the students see that, whether they see it themselves or not, just such an important thing that we can all do for them. Because, right, always think about how you used to be and how much you've grown. And I think that's really important, especially if students are showing a lot of really challenging behavior right in front of you, extra important, I think, in those cases to remember these assumptions. Okay, move on to the next one. Yeah. All right. So, and I think this one in particular, when it comes to things like counseling, right? When we are working with students thinking about a lot of choices, right? A lot of the work we do is about college, right? Should I go to this college? Should I go to that college? A lot of big decisions that we help students work through. So another assumption of the strength-based approach is that generally students do know their own situations best, and given options, and we think that's kind of the key word, options there, that those students can determine the best solutions for their challenges. This one's a little tricky, and sometimes we get some pushback on this, which I understand. Because sometimes decision-making from young folks, not great, absolutely. We see it too, but we think if you're truly being strength-based in the work, that it is our job to really help students explore all of their options, right? All of their options, ones they might not have thought of themselves, ones that frankly they probably might not want to hear. We remember how we said concreteness is one of those qualities that we think students really value, and trusted adults. Be concrete with them, help them think through the stuff that maybe they don't want to think about, and really help them think through the consequences of all of those options. And when we say consequences, we mean, yes, certainly the potential downsides, but also the upsides, right? Like concretely, what might that look like? And really help lay that stuff out there for them. But ultimately, we're not proscriptive, right? And our role, we really don't think it's for us to choose for the student. You'll never hear a 10,000 degree staff member say, I think you should go to this college. Nope. We'll say, here are your choices. Here are all the different ramifications for all of those choices, because we assume that that student is an expert in their own lives. That student, given those options, right, absolutely has the capacity to make the best possible choice for their particular challenge. And 100%, y'all have seen this. All of y'all, I'm sure, have seen this. A lot of times students make choices that, frankly, we're like, oh, that we don't agree with, or that maybe it wasn't a great choice. And the student has to live their life. They have to learn from that. And we have to back them and support them and be there for them, no matter what happens there. I love this last one. This is really empowering and liberating to me as a professional who works with young folks. The actual act of collaboration, right, between staff and students, that augments existing strengths for both, actually, right? For you, the staff member, the adult staff member, and for the student. That actual act of being strength-based, of sort of being on a similar, putting yourself at a similar level of the student, of being open-minded, you're going to learn a lot if you're paying attention from the students. They're going to give you a more nuanced understanding of their worlds, of their communities, of their ecosystems, right? If you're paying attention, you're going to learn a lot about what they're good at, right? And maybe things that they're still thinking about, that they want to do, if you're really paying attention. And that's a cool thing, right? You're modeling this potentially new behavior for that student. And they're like, oh, cool. This is the person that I can come to. This is the person that I can talk through these things with. And like, that's really augmenting it for the student as well. I love this one. For me, this was such a revelation when I first started thinking about it. So, okay, those are sort of our core assumptions. Let's start talking about some actual strength-based languages. Here's kind of our classic example. So challenges, that's a word you can use, right? That's the language you can use versus, say, problems. Why do you think we, in a strength-based manner, are always going to say challenges versus problems, right? Why do you think we're always going to say challenges instead of problems? We'll do a quick, this will be a shorter little breakout room, just a minute or two. But go ahead, in your small groups, we're talking strength-based language. Only one of these is strength-based. Okay, welcome back again. I hope you got to meet some new and interesting folks. I hope y'all got to share out a little bit. Just really briefly in the chat, why do you think the strength-based preferred language is challenges instead of problems? Can be overcome, positivity, motivating. Yes, look at this. Absolutely. Language matters. It really does matter. It affects cognition and it affects behavior, both from us, the way we think about students and families and the way we act towards them. And also it affects those students and those families as well. To hear this, right, framed differently, framed in a strength-based manner, a challenge is absolutely an opportunity for growth, right? It could be a turning point in that student's life. There's a real chance for success. There is, right? If something is framed as a challenge, you can beat a challenge. You can overcome a challenge. It's focused on the future, right? Remember, that was one of kind of our core principles of strength-based practice, is that it's future focused and it's potentially a partnership. You, the adult in that student's life, can absolutely help partner with that student to overcome a challenge. Yes, as opposed to problems. How does that feel? Nobody wants to hear they have a problem. A challenge, I can do something about that, but the problem kind of makes you feel a little bit stuck in the past. Doesn't really do anything to look forward, right? And encourage positive change. And kind of get stuck in sort of some hopelessness, some blame, which we're really trying to stay away from. And there's not really a potential partnership there. Not a lot of opportunity there for growth. I'll introduce all of them here, and then we'll do one more breakout. We think one of these, only one of these, is strength-based, and we want y'all to talk about which one, and as ever, why. Like, right? The thought process is always the most interesting part. So our second example here is students versus kids, right? We like students. You will never hear a 10,000 degree staff member say kids. Another example is students with disabilities versus disabled students. And the last one, undocumented versus illegal versus dreamer. We actually only like one of those, and we only think one of those three phrases is actually truly strength-based, and we staff at 10,000 degrees only choose to use one of those three terms. So again, see if y'all have a guess as to which one is the strength-based language, but as ever, the more important and the more interesting piece is the discussion around why. So we're going to put you back in some new breakout rooms and talk about all three: kids versus students, students with disabilities versus disabled students, and this last one, undocumented versus illegal versus dreamer. And we'll go for a good 5 minutes because there's a lot to chew on here, and then we'll come back and join the big group. All right. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope y'all had some really interesting discussion in there. But let's get into our word pairings here, our strength-based language. And let's start with that first one, students versus kids. So one of these is strength-based, and we're gonna always say students, right, at 10,000 degrees versus kids. I also appreciate, because we've gotten a lot of feedback over the years from maybe more experienced, more veteran staff members who have their own children who are about the same age as the students we serve, that, in their minds, it's, my kids are the same age as the students we serve at 10,000 degrees. So this is potentially challenging for me to do this. And we hear that and would still encourage everybody to use the word students or use the word scholars, maybe something like that. It's strength-based, right? And frankly, it's appropriate in our work, right? They're attending your schools. They're part of your nonprofit organizations, which are education related, and just try it. Try saying it, try writing it instead of kids. Try to replace that with students and see what that does to your own cognition, to your own behavior. That's our first example. So students with disabilities versus disabled students. We think only one of those is truly strength-based. And the one we like is students with disabilities instead of disabled students. Why? Because the first word there is students, right? And yes, that student may have a disability, but, right, as opposed to, if you flip it, the language, and say disabled students, you're allowing disabled, that disability, to define that student. You're putting it first, actually. So try it. Try saying instead students with disabilities, right? Or students with it's a mental health challenge or like a physical health challenge, but students first, because you're not defining the student by a disability, right? You're defining them as a person, as a student first, which is really strength-based. So give that one a shot too. Okay, undocumented versus illegal versus dreamer. I think it's fairly obvious that that middle term, illegal, is pretty offensive and very much deficiency-based, so that one's out. But that leaves us with undocumented versus dreamer. And this one's tricky, and there's usually interesting discussion about this. Undocumented versus dreamer, right? We like undocumented, and this is the word, the strength-based language that we choose to use when we're talking about the undocumented community or individual students who are themselves undocumented. See what I did? Students who are undocumented, right? As opposed to dreamer, which you actually will hear in the public discourse. There are some very good nonprofit organizations that center the word dream like in their title, right? You know, students who are undocumented, people who are undocumented, there's really no value judgment on that at all, right? It's just a status, like a documentation status. There's no real judgment in it one way or another. And we're not putting it first. It's not defining that person. They're a person first who happens to be undocumented. It's also more inclusive. DREAM, D-R-E-A-M, that acronym actually originally did not come from the undocumented community. It came from some senators, right, who are trying to put together some bipartisan legislation to help serve a very narrow portion of folks in this country who are undocumented. And so dreamer usually only refers to very high achieving college students, recent graduates who are DACA eligible, right? And we love those students. We count many of them amongst our alums and current students, but that's a small fraction of the 11 to 12 million folks who are undocumented in this country. And so that's our recommendation for strength-based language. And so I'm going to turn it over to Raina for non-judgmental practice. Thank you all.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much. So when we talk about non-judgmental practice, this may seem really obvious, like, duh, okay, don't judge your students. But our definition of what that truly looks like is actually a lot more nuanced than that. So first, it's important to remember that our own values and beliefs are our own, and we can't assume that students share them. So this goes for what we may think of as good values or bad values. Especially those of us who do our work through a social justice, anti-oppressive lens, we tend to be people with very strong opinions and convictions, right? So another thing that I think is really important to name is that it's important to recognize, whether we like it or not, many students, especially if you're working with underserved populations, and if you have identities that you share with your students, they can unconsciously perceive us as the gatekeeper of their futures. I know there's a lot to be unpacked there, but ideally we don't want our students, to see anybody as a gatekeeper to their dream college, dream career, goals, whatever. But regardless, your opinions and the scope of the options that you provide to them can hold a lot of weight in the decisions that they're going to make. And, I think we've all heard a story about some school counselor somewhere telling a student that they would never accomplish X, Y, or Z, right? So with this in mind, I want you to also think about the ways that you could be, or may have been in the past, unintentionally coercive when providing support for a student. And, I myself am guilty of this. Years ago at a different job, I can remember an instance where I presented information to somebody in a way that aligned with my agenda, my social justice agenda, and I had great intent. And I was being coercive because I wanted this person to choose the option that I thought was best for them. And that was not my role in that moment. So remembering that intentions do not always equal impact, mistakes will happen. And even if you're coming from, a position of positive intention, it's possible that our judgments will cloud our practices with students. So what's super key for us in non-judgmental practice is self-awareness. Self-awareness in many different capacities, awareness of our judgments rather than pretending that we don't have them, but also awareness of our own values, things that aren't always as easy for us to see, like awareness of our positionality, our privilege, our trauma, and everything that comes with that baggage that we bring with us into a safe space that we're trying to create for our students. Because if we have a lot of trauma or things to unpack, especially those of us that may be feeling burnt out in our work or emotionally drained, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can forget that we're here working towards the mission of educational equity. And we can become negative or discouraging in this space that we're supposed to be holding for our students, not for ourselves. I think it's easier for this to happen than we might think. But with that being said, we shouldn't be expected to deny our feelings or pretend that we don't have judgments, because it's just not realistic. We're all human, especially when our boundaries are being challenged or something is potentially, emotionally triggering. And, I can say that I know for me, working with youth who are in gang affiliated families brings up a lot of feelings for me. And it's also not easy for me to advise students who work full-time and struggle with academic progress. There's a lot of feelings and, maybe some judges that come up, around that because of my lived experiences. But I also need to remember that my judgments, that I have are influenced by my experiences and my privilege more than anything. So, and then you can also think about, is that something that you need to share with your student? What would be your intent of sharing how you feel? If it's to make myself feel better, then probably not, right? So in cases like this where things are coming up for us, what does non-judgmental practice look like? As I said, it's not about denying our feelings or pretending we don't have judgments. It's knowing that there's a difference between feeling a feeling and acting on a feeling. And knowing that if I have a judgment about what this student is doing, that's my own thing, that's on me. And my role in this moment is to provide the best possible care and guidance for what this student is telling me that they need. So active listening, paraphrasing back to the student when they're talking are really helpful tools. And it's okay to check in if we're concerned. And for me, that might look like, very open-ended questions like, do you need a referral to a healthcare provider? How are things going at home? What does your success plan look like for the semester? And then providing referrals when that's relevant. And then another thing that can happen sometimes is we can either over-identify or project on students, or if we're working with populations that are very different from us, we can other them and make generalizations about their experiences. But if you can learn to recognize your judgments, you can hold on to them and then they won't come out in other ways. And again, so remembering and honoring that we're in a position of privilege and influence with our students who tend to really look up to us is so critical. So some things that you can ask yourself are you responding to the student or are you responding to your stereotype of the student? If you don't share many identities with your student, can you hear them clearly or is there too much static? And if you don't share identities with them, are you assuming that you understand things about them because of that? So essentially, when I'm asked, how do you provide non-judgmental strength-based advising? What if I really don't understand the student's struggle? I don't know what to say. I don't relate to them in any way. I struggle because I don't agree with their lifestyle or with their decisions. So when in doubt, just always fall back on the most important principle in strength-based philosophy. You can never go wrong if you approach every conversation knowing and believing to your core that this student already has within them the power to become their fully self-actualized version of themselves. And their journey to get there might not be linear, but it's their journey. And all you have to do is show up as your beautiful, empathetic self. So with that being said, we want to go into a self-reflection exercise. And this is going to be a quiet exercise. We're not going to share out to the whole group, just kind of take a few minutes to, do this quietly by yourself. And just, take a look at some of these statements and reflect on, what things come up for you when you read this. And then we'll regroup in a few minutes. Now what we want to do is we want to transition into looking over some real case studies, and we're going to do this in a breakout session. So we're going to present to you some real scenarios that we've seen with our students over the years, and we want you to discuss and reflect on the case study and really think about, when you read this case study, what does it bring up for you, and how would you advise this student in a strength-based, non-judgmental manner? We'll give y'all around 10 minutes to discuss, so a little bit longer for this one. All righty, so great. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you were able to have some good discussions around these case studies. I just want to summarize our main points that we went over today. So remember that each student already has an existing reservoir of competencies from which they can draw. Each student has the capacity for growth and change. Students know their own situations best, and when given options, they can determine the best solutions for their own challenges. And language matters. And most importantly, know that at the end of the day, there's no perfect formula in this work. These are the practices that have worked best for us. And you will find your own voice within all of this and your own method that works best for you.
And one thing I would say too, to add to our conclusion is if, to Raina's point, which I really like and want to reemphasize, if you're feeling conflicted about maybe I identify too much with this one student or not enough, I don't know that much about the lived experiences of that student and their identities, you can always kind of fall back on these best practices. I think that's one of our big points is remember where we started, like what are the qualities that students are looking for in trusted adults? No matter where you're at in your journey with this stuff, no matter how new to this field or how experienced you are in this field, you can always fall back on that. And you can always give that and provide that to any student you're working with. But thank you all again so much. Hopefully y'all got something out of this. Hopefully this sparks some new areas of inquiry for you in your own professional practice. Really appreciate it, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your effort and vulnerability today. Take care, everybody.